because we don't have unlimited time and energy or nearly enough allies to take on every issue, we need to take the long view, and we need to focus on building the relationships and understandings that give us the greatest impact for the future. What are the big issues and what are our big goals? It seems clear that, given the gap between the love people have of libraries and their understanding of what libraries are really all about, and the intensely competitive environment for attention and for resources and so on, it's essential to strengthen the understanding of decision makers about three things. What libraries and librarians really do that's unique and valuable, why it matters in terms of their values and their priorities within the communities that we serve, and thirdly, why it's urgent. This uber objective of creating fundamental understandings should govern all our advocacy efforts. In other words, let's identify and communicate our big story, and then use specific opportunities to illustrate or reinforce that narrative. What kinds of specific opportunities? Here are just a few. You'll have more. Debates on the value of physical space in libraries in a digital age. Challenges to individual book titles in a collection, or limitations on public internet access. All these highly specific questions are occasions for circling round to the high ground of what is valuable, even transformative, to our communities. So what's the story? Here are some basic guidelines to communicating the essence of our story in ways that will stick. The first and most obvious one is to know what your story is. In business, it's called the value proposition. The value proposition, as defined in Forbes.com, is, quote, a positioning statement that explains what benefit you provide, for whom, and how you do it uniquely well. It describes your target buyer, the problem you solve, and why you're distinctly better than the alternatives. Now, this comes from business, but we can learn from it. Alvin Schrader observed 15 years ago that, quote, the biggest challenge facing the library community is telling its story, going beyond the data in meaningful ways that will resonate with sponsors, policymakers, politicians, and library users alike, unquote. That challenge is still with us. We need to tell that story in terms of benefits and not features, in terms of impacts, not inputs. We need to be able to say it in a few words also. What is important about our library in relation to our community? Now, this isn't easy. We will see in the interview with Nancy Cronick that many seasoned Library Association leaders could not answer that question in a few words without some training. Associations have assembled some very good point form summaries of benefits and impacts. One is the Advocacy University on the American Library Association website. Another is the National Values Profile of Canadian Libraries by Schrader and Brundin. These are just a couple of examples. Both of these include many statements that are readily transferable to other countries with similar library and cultural traditions. By being able to communicate the nature and impacts of the library and its value for the community, and to respond to tough questions, we can convey authority. And as we know from Cialdini, authority is highly influential. What if we paid as much attention on our library websites to the library's story as we do to promoting events and enabling searches? Sometimes, we can forget to communicate the most obvious things. But knowing our story and being able to support it with authority is only part of our communication challenge. We have to be able to tell this story in relation to our audiences. So, who are these audiences of decision makers and influencers, and what do they care about? For what are they accountable? What do they already know? Whose communications do they trust the most? And how do we find out about them? We need to tell them what they need to know based on what they care about, not what we want them to hear. And there's a difference. That's because of the basic advocacy principle that people do things for their reasons, not our reasons. For example, what do principals and directors of education need to know about the school library program? If their top priority is student results in standardized tests, which is a major focus in K-12 education, they probably need to know about the relationship between good library programs and these scores, and they need to see it in action. In particular, they need to know that a determining factor is the work that a qualified school librarian does with teachers and students. Furthermore, they need to hear it from people with whom they are already in a relationship of credibility and trust. Maybe that principals need to hear it from other principals who are their peers, and not just from school librarians. Remember from Cialdini the power of social proof or consensus in influencing others. However, and it's a big however, it is essential that our performance, the stories that decision makers hear from library members and from others, and their own direct experience of the library, if they have it, be consistent with our messages about quality and service and impacts. No advocacy strategy that I'm aware of can compensate for a disconnect between our story and what decision makers actually hear or experience. Another example, what's the role and justification of makerspaces in public libraries? These are learning labs that combine equipment and software and mentoring and collaboration so that participants can create documents and music and things. Why should any public money go into something that may appear to be so unrelated to the mission and traditions of public libraries? Many decision makers and influencers see libraries as being entirely about books. So, what's our story here? I think of Mary Dempsey, former commissioner of libraries in Chicago, who was interviewed about Chicago Public Library's then brand new U-Media space for youth. In a short media interview, she used the phrase, "How teens learn," twice. She focused the attention of the audience on the facilitation of learning, which is at the heart of the public library's mission, and demonstrated the library's unique contribution to that learning. That's her story. We continue to examine the audience in our next video.